Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's start our Tuesday class. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo, Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Om Bhurbhuvasvaha, Tatsavitra Varenyam, Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Dhiyo Yo Naha Prachodayam, Asto Ma Satamya, Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya, Mrityurma Amritam Gamya. Om Sena Bhavatu Sena Bhunatu Saviryam Karvavai Tejasvi Navadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahi. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let's open our Uddhava Gita books. Page number 111. And verse number 28. So it's still that story continues. Story being told by Lord Krishna to Uddhava, and the story about one of his ancestors with Avdhut Brahman. So he says, Srishtvaha Purani Vividhanye Ajyatma Shaktya Vriksha Vrikshan Sarisrip Pashun Khaga Dandashukan Ter Atushtaha Hridya Purushaha Vidhaya Brahma Avalokaha Dishanam Mudam Apaha Deva. The Supreme Lord first created with the help of his energy, Maya Shakti, trees, insects, animals, birds, reptiles, and so on. And yet, he was not satisfied. Finally, the Lord created the human body, which offers the conditioned soul sufficient intelligence to realize him. And thus he became pleased. So this buddhi, he gave it to us. Okay, and from this verse we can see that what is the purpose of this buddhi? To realize him, to know him. This human form of body, which can award one liberation, was created by the Supreme Controller. Therefore, one should not misuse this body and go to hell. Hell means downward. It is described in this verse, after creating various types of bodies, the Supreme Controller was not satisfied, and so he finally created the human body. Considering it suitable for awarding the conditioned soul the opportunity to regain his association. It is stated in the Vedas that after creating the human form of body, the Supreme Lord achieved immense happiness. So this was a perfection in this creation. After creating various types of bodies, the Lord called for a cow and asked, "Do you know the Supreme Lord?" She replied, "No, I cannot understand who's the Supreme Lord." Then the Lord called a horse and asked it the same question. The horse gave a similar reply. Then the Lord called for human beings and asked them the same question. They replied, "We will know you by your mercy." So this verse is from Atriya Upanishad. The Supreme Lord, with the help of his energy, and what is that energy? The Yogmaya, so God's energy, creates the enjoyers and the objects of enjoyment, imbuing them with their respective propensities. However, the enjoyers, the minute conditioned spirit souls, cannot be satisfied by enjoying limited and temporary inert objects. Until the conditioned soul, who is a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, realizes that the attempt to enjoy material form taste, sound, smell, and touch without self realization is most abominable, he will continue to suffer material miseries. However, when he realizes his spiritual identity as the eternal servant of the Lord, he crosses over the influence of Maya and accepts himself as being maintained and protected by the Lord. Such a pure devotee, being freed from the false pride, never thinks of himself as the maintainer or enjoyer. Beautifully explained. Verse number 29. Labdhava sudurlabham idam bahu sambhavante manusyam arthadam anityam api hadhira turnam yatet napatet anumrityu yavan nishresaya vishye khalu sarvata sayat. After many lifetimes in lower species, one achieves the rare human form of life. Although temporary, the human body gives one the opportunity to attain the perfection of life. One who is actually intelligent should try to attain this perfection of life as long as the body remains healthy. After all, sense gratification is available in all the other species of life, whereas Krishna consciousness can only be cultivated by a human being. So we can love God only as a human being. So we are fortunate enough to be born as human beings in this lifetime. Should not waste this opportunity. Although this body is temporary, we all know it's temporary. No matter how well we eat, how much we exercise, ultimately it's going to perish. So although this body is temporary, it awards eternal benefit. Therefore, one should try to attain supreme auspiciousness as long as the body is functioning properly. One should know for certain that the body is born, then dies, and then again one accepts another birth, which are all temporary. Sense enjoyment, which is available in the human form of life, is also available for hogs, dogs, and horses. So we don't want to just live a life where we only gratify our senses. We got to learn how to use our intellect also to attain that perfection. The conditioned souls are subjected to the cycle of repeated birth and death. Sometimes one becomes a demigod, sometimes a human being, sometimes an animal, and sometimes a tree or even a stone. In this way, the eternal soul identifies himself in various ways. According to the body that he receives, according to his particular type of body, a living entity is destined to enjoy a particular set of sense objects. This is also true for a human being. But the human form of life affords one the opportunity to cultivate knowledge of the absolute truth. Therefore, the human form of life is extremely desirable. Still, one cannot remain permanently in the human body. Only the human form affords one the opportunity of attaining life's ultimate goal. Therefore, while situated in a human body, one should carefully consider how to attain life's perfection and not waste his valuable time gratifying his senses to no avail. Even activities meant for the temporary welfare of human society should be avoided. One should only cultivate the devotional service of the Lord because only this will afford him eternal benefit. Once supreme benefit is obtained when one follows in the footsteps of those who do not endeavor for material gain because they are always engaged in the service of the Supreme Lord. Duties to family, society, and one's occupation only seem prominent as long as one does not strive for his ultimate benefit by surrendering to the Lord. By the association of devotees, one awakens his eternal propensity for devotional service. Without taking shelter of the association of devotees, one must continue to suffer the threefold material miseries. Even when such non-devotees strive for liberation from material miseries, they generally become impersonalists. Number 30. Evam sanjat vairagya vigyana lok atmani vichrabi mahim etam mukta sango nahankrita. Having learned these lessons from my spiritual masters, I remain fixed in realization of the Supreme Lord. So this is Avadhut is saying. And fully renounced and enlightened by realized spiritual knowledge, I wander over the earth without mundane association or false ego. Because that King Yadu asked him, how did you attain this kind of a state? So he says, I learned from all these creatures through the nature also. And that's why I can do this. That's why I am so detached and I'm just totally blissful. In reply to King Yadu's question, the Brahman said, I have acquired knowledge in this way. I have become detached from sense gratification. I have realized the presence of the Supreme Super Soul by practical application of my acquired knowledge. Okay, so sure, we need the knowledge, we need to acquire knowledge, but ultimately we got to practice those two. Without practice, that knowledge is just a burden. I have become freed from false ego, and I wander about this world free from unnecessary association. Unnecessary association. Very important term, unnecessary. So we got to look at it. Which part of our association is unnecessary? Prune it. Number 31. Na he ekasmad guror jnanam susthiram seyat supushkalam brahmetad advityam ve giyate bahud rishibhi. Although God is one, sages have described him in different manners. For this reason, one may not be able to gain a complete understanding of God from one ordinary spiritual master. So the question may arise that since the Supreme Lord has said, Tasmat Gurum Parpadyet Jignashuhu Shreha Utman. One should take shelter of a self-realized spiritual master who knows the science of the absolute truth and inquire from him about one's ultimate welfare. Then how can one have more than one guru? Shwet Ketu and Bhrigu are examples of those who had more than one guru. In this regard, the Brahman replied, it is true that I have only one initiating guru, but in the field of practical activity, I have found these 25 objects as providing very good and bad examples to take lessons from. And so I have accepted them as my Shiksha Gurus, or instructing spiritual masters. By observing examples of good behavior, one will be strengthened in devotional service, and in seeing negative examples, one will be forewarned and avoid danger. Okay, that means that guru, sure, we have only one guru, but the teachers can be many. We can learn from different places, but a guru must be just one. Otherwise, there will be a conflict in the mind. I have learned to become detached from 8 spiritual masters, the pigeon, fish, deer, young girl, elephant, snake, moth, kurur bird. I have learned both renunciation of the temporary and acceptance of the eternal from 3 spiritual masters, the honeybee, the honey thief, and Pingla. I have learned how to cultivate interest in the Supreme Lord from the other spiritual masters, beginning with the earth. Acceptance of many instructing spiritual masters often helps to strengthen one's convictions. The most correct meaning of the word Brahma is Lord Vishnu. There is no worthy song or subject for hearing other than that which glorifies Lord Vasudeva. There is nothing actually worth learning in this world other than knowledge leading to the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. Cultivating knowledge in a way that is not related to the Lord can do nothing more than enhance our material enjoyment. Verse number 32 now, Lord Krishna is saying to Uddhava. So, because that story has ended now, so he says, Iti uktavaha sa yadum viprasaha tam amantrehe gambhirahadi vandita swa archito ragyay yayo prito yathagatam. The Supreme Lord said, having thus spoken to King Yadu, the wise Brahman accepted obeisance and worship from the king. Feeling satisfied within himself, he left exactly as he had come, after bidding the king farewell. So that means that he did not feel any pride or anything. He just was there. After giving these lessons to him, he just left without any kind of emotions or any change in him. The last verse of this chapter. Avdhut vacha shrutvaha purvesham nasapurja sarvasangah vinirmuktaha samuchito babhuva. O Uddhava, King Yadu, who was the forefather of our ancestors, became freed from all material attachment, so that his mind became fixed in tranquility after hearing these statements of the Avdhut. So sometimes, if we listen carefully, absorb it, this Shravan itself makes a big difference. And this is what happened to King Yadu. The Supreme Lord Krishna said to Uddhava, after the Brahman Dattatreya had instructed King Yadu, he departed out of his own sweet will, just as he had come. Now the next chapter, chapter 4, the nature of fruitive activity. First, let's look at the summary. In this chapter, Lord Shri Krishna refutes the doctrines of philosophers like Gemini and describes to Uddhava how the conditioned souls can develop pure transcendental knowledge. One who is fully surrendered unto the Supreme Lord should follow the Vaishnava Dharma that is described in the Pancharatra and other revealed scriptures. According to his natural qualities and work, one should follow the rules of Varanashram without duplicity. See, Varanashram is at what stage of life we are in. So-called knowledge that is received through one's material senses, mind, and intelligence is as useless as the dreams experienced by a person attached to sense gratification. Therefore, one should give up work for sense gratification and accept work as a matter of duty. When one has come to understand something of the truth of the self, he should give up material work performed out of duty and simply dedicate himself completely to the service of the bona fide spiritual master, who is the manifest representative of the personality of Godhead. A disciple should have firm faith in his spiritual master. He should be anxious to learn from him the science of the soul, and he should be free from envy and the tendency to indulge in nonsense talk. The spirit soul is separate from both the gross and the subtle bodies. An embodied soul accepts different kinds of bodies according to his karma. Only a bona fide spiritual master is able to impart the knowledge of self-realization. By refuting the philosophies of Gemini and others, Lord Krishna explains that the embodied soul, who has come in contact with segmented material time, takes upon himself a perpetual chain of births and deaths and is therefore forced to suffer the resultant happiness and distress. Thus, there is no possibility that one who is attached to the fruits of his material work can achieve any substantial goal in life. The pleasures of heaven, which are achieved by performing sacrificial rituals, can be experienced for only a short time. After one's heavenly enjoyment is finished, one must return to this mortal sphere to partake of lamentation and suffering. On the path of materialism, there is certainly no uninterrupted happiness. Uninterrupted means there's a happiness and there's a sadness. Duality is there. Okay. So let's look at verse number 1 in this chapter number 4. Mayo, and these are the words spoken by Lord Krishna. Mayo aditeshva avhita swadharmeshu mad ashraya varnashram kulacharam akamatmaha samacharet. The Supreme Lord said, one who is surrendered unto me should tirelessly practice Vaishnav Dharma as prescribed by me in scriptures, such as the Pancharatra. He should also perform his occupational duties according to the system of Varnashram, which is a favorable condition for accepting spiritual life. Okay, that is like living a life according to the stage of our life, Varnashram. In this chapter, the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, the living entity's bondage as a result of their contact with matter, and the refutation of philosophers like Gemini are described. Having given Uddhava many valuable lessons by narrating the story of an Avadhut Brahman, the Supreme Lord now describes the process of sadhana. He says, O Uddhava, you should follow the Varna Ashram Dharma and the devotional practices described by me in the scriptures, like the Pancharatra. The Supreme Lord said, one should take shelter of me and work under my direction while following the system of Varnashram. If one gives up my shelter and engages in fruitive activities due to material attachment, he will never attain his ultimate welfare. When one follows Varnashram Dharma and family traditions simply by amassing pious merit rather than for engagement in my service, one is certainly misdirected and will never attain eternal benefit. Despite executing one's duties as described by me in the Vedas and rejecting all prohibited activities, if one does not take shelter of me, then his endeavor is ultimately useless. On the other hand, if one engages in my devotional service without devotion, there is no necessity for performing the religious duties prescribed in the Vedas. When my unalloyed devotees fail to observe all the rules and regulations prescribed in the Vedas, they should never be considered as misguided. Verse number 2. Anvikshet vishuddhatma dehe nam vishe atma nam guneshu tattva dhyanena sarva arambha viprayam. A transcendentalist should see that because the conditioned souls who are dedicated to sense gratification have falsely accepted the objects of sense pleasure as a reality, all of their endeavors are doomed to failure. How is it possible to give up material desires? The reply given here is that one should see the disastrous result obtained by materialistic people who consider the temporary manifestations of this world to be ultimate reality. So, we can always learn from others' mistakes also. Okay? Because we don't have to make all the mistakes ourselves. By such an observation, one will certainly become detached from the aspiration to enjoy such objects that will disappear in due course of time. So when the conditioned souls come to realize the utter futility of their endeavors to enjoy the temporary manifestations of this world, they certainly become detached. Okay, so it's not that we have to just fulfill all the desires to become detached. We can become detached by watching others also. There are a lot of positive examples, negative examples. We can always learn from them. Verse number 3. Suptasye vishya lokoho dhyayato va manoratha nana atamkatva vifla tatha bhedatma dhim gunai. A sleeping person may see many objects of sense gratification in his dreams, but such things are merely creations of his mind and are thus of no benefit to him. Similarly, one who is asleep to his spiritual identity sees many sense objects in this world, but they are all creations of the Lord's illusory potency and have no permanent existence. One who meditates upon the temporary objects of the senses, therefore uselessly engages his intelligence, because the results of material work are temporary. They cannot provide one with the lasting benefit and are thus considered useless. Materialistic activities can never bring one to the perfection of life or free one from the pangs of material existence. Material intelligence, when impelled by the senses, strongly desires sense gratification and thus separates one from one's real self-interest. Such diverted intelligence will never be able to understand the absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna. The devotees of the Lord, however, fix their intelligence upon him by meditating upon his form, qualities, pastimes, and devotees. In this way, their intelligence is never separated from the absolute truth, as stated in Bhagavad Gita. So he's quoting this verse number 21 from chapter number 2. Those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one. O beloved child of the Kurus, the intelligence of those who are irresolute is many branched. So the sense objects observed in one's dreams of no value. Just as the objects seen in the waking state are ultimately useless. Why? Because they are temporary. Temporary. We are looking for a permanent happiness, everlasting bliss. We are never satisfied until we get that. Otherwise, we are just tossing ourselves in this sansar, coming back and going and then coming back again. Verse number 4. Nivritam karam se vet pravritam mat parastya jet jigyasa yam sampravrito nadriyet karam chodhanam. One who has fixed his mind on me, making me his goal of life, should give up activities of sense gratification and should instead engage in the regulated practice of devotional service. On the other hand, when one is fully endeavoring for self-realization, he has no need to follow the scriptural injunctions regarding fruitive activities. Okay? So all those scriptural injunctions, the Karam Kand is talking about, they are the means. If a person has already reached the end, doesn't need to do that. Often we make the means as our end. But if we remember that means are just the means to reach the end. So a materialistic person does whatever is pleasing to his senses. One who acts according to religious principles regulates his material enjoyment in a way that is prescribed in the scriptures. Those who are advancing toward the transcendental platform, however, desist from all activities of sense gratification. In Bhagavad Gita, it is stated, for one who is a neophyte in the eightfold yoga system, work is said to be the means. And for one who is already elevated in yoga, cessation of all material activity is said to be the means. A person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. So ultimately, with the means, you get to the end and you are united. That's a yogi. There is no need for those who are engaged in the service of the Supreme Lord to perform fruitive activities with a desire to enhance their worldly enjoyment. One should remain aloof from the activities of sense gratification and instead engage in unalloyed devotional service to the Supreme Lord. Engagement in devotional service to the Supreme Lord is real freedom from material desires. The paths of sense gratification and renunciation are always full of contradictions, whereas the service of the Supreme Lord is the doubtless path of perfection. Number 5. Yaman abhikshanam sevet niyaman mat parakwach mad abhigyam gurum shantam upasit mad atmakam. One who has surrendered unto me, accepting me as the goal of life, should follow all the rules that forbid sinful activities. So that means we should not do sinful activities. Okay, so one should also try his best to follow all the sub-religious principles, such as those dealing with cleanliness. One should approach a bona fide spiritual master who is intimately related to me and who is thus very peaceful and is non-different from me. So he's encouraging us to find a guru so that we can get benefit in the association of a guru also. One should very carefully control his senses and follow the scriptural injunctions for morality, such as non-violence and cleanliness. These rules will be more fully described later on. One who is intelligent should faithfully render service to a self-realized spiritual master who has full knowledge of the Supreme Personality of the Godhead. It is the eternal duty of everyone to worship his spiritual master who is always engaged in the service of the Supreme Lord. The devotees of the Lord are always engaged in devotional service, which is concomitantly inclusive of activities such as yam and niyam. And you're all familiar with these terms. If one is indifferent to the service of the Lord Hari, one's Guru and the Vaishnavas, one can never achieve eternal benefit. अमान्य है, अमत्सरो दक्ष हो, निर्ममो दृढ़ सोहृदा, असत्वर हो अर्थः जिज्ञासुर, अनसूयर अमोघ वाक. A disciple of the spiritual master should be freed from false pride, false ego, and laziness. He should give up all sense of proprietorship over the objects of the senses, even his wife and children. And he should have firm faith and affection for his spiritual master. He should be steady, always desiring advancement in spiritual understanding, and he should not envy anyone and should avoid useless talk. Amogh Vak. The duties of a disciple are being described. The disciple should not expect any respect for himself. He should not envy anyone. He should be expert and free from material attachment. He should have firm faith in the spiritual master as well as his worshipable Lord. He should always be eager to engage in devotional service and thus attain his goal of life. One who wants to advance in spiritual understanding should not find faults in others and should always avoid idle talk. Verse number 7. Jayah patyehe Greek kshetra swajana dravinadishu udasin samam pashyan sarveshu artham iv atmanah. A sincere disciple is equal to everyone. See, samdrashta. He should remain detached from his wife, children, household, property, relatives, wealth, and so on. How can one be without a sense of proprietorship? For example, a wealthy materialist will feel equally attached as the proprietor of all his various assets. But if some are taken away by thieves or the government, he gives up attachment for them. An intelligent person should understand that everything he possesses will not remain for long. Thus, he should cultivate a mood of detachment. The son of Chitraketu said in Srimad Bhagavatam, just as gold and other commodities are continually transferred from one place to another in due course of purchase and sale, so the living entity, as a result of his fruitive activities, wanders throughout the entire universe, being injected into various bodies and different species of life by one kind of father after another. Relatively few living entities are born in the human species. Others are born as animals. We know that humans are only handful in this entire creation. Although both are living entities, the relationships they establish are impermanent. An animal may remain in the custody of a human being for some time, then the same animal may be transferred to the possession of other human beings. As soon as the animal goes away, the formal proprietor no longer has a sense of ownership. As long as the animal is in his possession, he certainly has an affinity for it, but as soon as the animal is sold, the affinity is lost. As far as the spiritual master and the Lord are concerned, one should simply keep firm faith at their lotus feet. A devotee of the Lord should not consider himself to be the enjoyer of his wife, children, house, land, friends, and other possessions, knowing them to be intended for the Lord's service, just like himself. He should not try to demand respect from others with a desire to enjoy fame and reputation. He should become free from envy, laziness, and material attachment. He should be inquisitive, devoid of pride, truthful, and steady in his determination. So these are the qualities we need to cultivate to become a devotee. Very important. Because without the qualities, if we just only do the puja part, it's not going to take us anywhere. Only the hands are doing the puja, or the mouth is doing the puja. If there's no change inside, that's not the real puja. So that's why he is just again and again telling us what kind of qualities we need to cultivate. Let's do one more verse. Verse number 8. Vilakshanaha sathul sukshmad dehat atmekshitaha swadrik yatha agnir daruno dayad dahako anya prakashikaha. Just as a blazing fire is different from the wood it burns to provide illumination, so the knower within the material body is different from the body itself, which is pervaded by the consciousness of the soul. It should be firmly understood that the spirit soul and the body have different characteristics because they are two distinct entities. Okay, so body and the soul. One should not maintain the false egoistic conception of I and mine in relation to the material body. The gross and subtle bodies covering the living entities are made of the material elements, but the spirit soul is transcendental to matter. The spirit soul possesses the transcendental qualities of the Lord, but in minute quantity. So that's why it's called soul is the ansha of the anshi. In this verse, the soul is described as self-enlightened. Because the conditioned soul is enlightened by the mercy of the Lord, one may question how this can be. Although the Supreme Personality of Godhead certainly furnishes the living entity with consciousness, the living entity, being endowed with the potency of the Lord, has himself the capacity to revive and expand his pure consciousness. In this regard, the soul is compared to gold and silver, which, although having no power of self-illumination, brightly reflect the rays of the sun. Thus, it may be said that gold and silver possess the power to illuminate. Although not independently, this verse gives an example to illustrate how the spirit soul is distinct from the body. Just as fire is distinct from the wood it burns, the soul is distinct from the body, it illuminates with consciousness. In the conditional state, the spirit soul is compared to fire that is dormant within the wood. When the conditioned soul is enlightened, on the strength of his spiritual knowledge, he can burn his ignorance to ashes, just as fire burns wood. Just as fire is separate from the wood it burns, one is that which burns and the other is that which is burnt. The spirit soul is distinct from the gross body and subtle mind. He is self-manifest and minutely independent. Okay, so let's stop it here for today. And next week we'll start with verse number 9. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you very much.